If I were to tell you about a 20-volume Oxford English dictionary, what would your response be? If it's anything other than this, you might not be a poet. Want to know why? Well, that's what we're here to discuss today. Let's get to it, Pruitt. Hello, friend faces. I'm Abby Dorable, and I'm here to clear the air when it comes to poems, poets, and poetry, because as much as I love poetry, it really needs a bit of renovation. Now, if you love poetry too, if you're vaguely interested in what I have to say, or if you're just here for my hair and snazzy makeup, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button, because it keeps the wee beasties away and it keeps the YouTube engines happy. Thanks. Now, a couple things before we get started. First, I gave myself a week off between the How to Poet the Beginning series and this video because this video was really difficult for me to ideate. And here's why. When it comes to teaching poetry, there are a lot of conflicting ideas, some of which say you can't even teach poetry with a capital P at all. And indeed, I can't give you a recipe that will lead to an outstanding poem over and over and over again, nor can I teach you how you personally can evoke poetry in someone else repeatedly. But I can teach you about poems, I can teach you about poets, I can teach you about language and its strangeness, and I can teach you about how I and others utilize that strangeness of language to create poems. And I can also teach you the tools that tend to evoke poetry in others, and I can be with you as you explore all of this because it's kind of difficult to go it alone. Now, I can't teach you how to write poetry with a capital P, but I can teach you how to Poe. And in the practice of Poe, you will eventually learn how you can evoke poetry with poems. So that's part of it. Now, another part of why I had the week off is because, still acknowledging everything that I said, there are two main schools of thought when it comes to teaching poetry. I'll call them the formal school and the excavation school. The formal school, again, no bow ties and ball gowns, teaches you about all sorts of forms of poems: meter, rhyme, enjambment, assonance, consonants, and other sonic tools, and typically in that order. The other school of thought is excavation. Let's forget about form and start hacking away at the subconscious, and let's get words down on paper to see what you have to offer. There are benefits and drawbacks to each of these styles. Form is one of the first things that we see when we read a poem. It's what announces to us, hey, this is a poem, we should pay attention. Form is also an incredibly powerful tool, and there are lots of benefits of knowing historical forms and using the provided structure as a plug-and-play method of writing poems so that students can experience how powerful a tool form is and find creative ways of solving problems that the form provides. But you don't tend to end up with many good poems that way. And when using the excavation method, you turn over the fresh earth of your subconscious for imagination and insights to sprout ideas, and you end up with some really cool stuff, but you often lack the confidence and the skill and the trust to be able to shape those ideas into a fully formed poem that evokes poetry in other people. You have a lot of material, but difficulty knowing the best way to shape it to get the most out of it. So when I set out to create this channel, I had to decide how I was going to approach the structure of my content, because my goal is to post once a week, twice if I'm feeling cheeky. And going into multiple topics in one video will lead to a lot of really long videos, a lot of confusion, and missed moments of learning and teaching. I can't structure my content like a standard class or workshop. After all, more than half of the class or workshop dynamic is missing, with no interpersonal communication between you and me and you and each other. So I can't simultaneously teach you about form and give you tools that will help you relinquish your hold over language so that you can set about to explore its strangeness and weirdness and wonders. So that left me with a question of approach. I decided what I can do, though, is I can volley beat back and forth between excavation and formal techniques. But then Where do I begin? We really need to get some baseline stuff out of the way so that we can volley back and forth with the tools of poetry. Now, originally I was going to start with metaphor because that is perhaps the most important tool in a poet's toolbox. But then to understand metaphor, you need to understand image. So then I thought I'd start with image. But then to grasp image and the fact that it's a multi-sensory thing, you really have to have a good grasp of words. So here we are, and we are starting with words, specifically diction. Now, when I told one of my friends this, he laughed and he said, "How long is your video going to be?" Because this is a big topic. Diction is basically your word choice determining your writing style. The words you choose create your voice, your tenor, your essence on the page. Diction is why your speaking sounds different than your writing, which sounds different from your poetry, which sounds different from your fiction, which sounds different from your nonfiction, and why your writing to a kindergartner and to a college professor are inherently different. How in the world do you create a video about all of that and relate it to poetry? That's a huge undertaking. Well, there's not going to be just one video. To poe is to strive to create poetry, and on this channel we're using how to do so with language. Basically, every video from here on is going to be a little bit about diction and the tools that impact it. Diction is a very broad topic, and there are different types of it and different ways to employ it for different effects and affectations. When you first start out writing, regardless of whether you're following the formal path or the excavatory one, you choose your words. As you grow, the way you choose your words and what goes behind your word choice develops depending on what you're writing. In the case of poetry, that is your poetic diction. And your poetic diction and your regular diction aren't necessarily the same thing. And there are a lot of tools that can help you form that diction. One of the most powerful tools is the dictionary. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned a 20-volume Oxford English dictionary. And there's a reason for that. I don't have it. I wish I did. In an early episode of one of my favorite podcasts, Poetry Off the Shelf, Matthew Zapruder, the author of one of my favorite books, Why Poetry, mentions how where he works has a 20-volume Oxford English dictionary, like next to him in a room that he can use and people can go up and use it. The host of that podcast, Helena de Groot, sighs at its mention. This sigh, it is a sigh of longing, it's a sigh of desire, it's a sigh of envy, it is a sigh of reverence. This sigh carries so much, and I know this because I had the same sigh at the same time, and I'm betting that a lot of poets out there did. And if you haven't listened to that podcast, just me mentioning it is probably making you think, yes, that 20-volume Oxford English Dictionary can live in my apartment rent-free, and I can make it tea, and we can snuggle at night. And here's why. The love of words. Now, I mentioned in my What is Poe video that to be a poet, you have to have a love of words. I also mentioned a couple times over the beginning of the series that the dictionary is one of the most powerful tools of the Army Poetica. I never specified why, but here's where I start that explanation. The most discrete unit of language is the word. Just for clarity, I use the term word holistically. I realize that in other languages, they use signs, symbols, characters, and other things as discrete units. But because those words have different meanings when we're talking about writing, all of my references to words includes those discrete units of other languages, unless I specify English words. For example, in English, words are made up of vowels and consonants. We can view vowels, consonants, and the tension between the two as the electrons, protons, and neutrons, respectively. And the English words that these make up are an atom of an element, or an idea, to continue a metaphor. So here we have this thing. Now, the letters P, O, T, A, T, and O have nothing to do with this thing. But when we combine them in that specific order, we spell potato. This is a process of abstraction, which is what language does. It abstracts the thing, potato, into bits of language, letters that form words in English, that can be transferred here there and everywhere. As long as you participate in the language, you know what is being communicated. Now, the barcode, the SKU number, are another type of language that stores use to tally things and keep track of sales and whatnot. ISBNs keep track of books. QR codes are used to keep track of myriad things. All of these are a way of saying this distinct thing is separate from that distinct thing. So that then we can say, I want two of this distinct thing, one of that distinct thing, and I will give you this separate distinct thing in exchange for those distinct things that I mentioned earlier. Now that sounds a bit complicated because I'm not being specific. So here's what I mean. When we talk about potato, write about potato, try to engage in commerce over potato, we don't use this thing to represent itself. We use an abstraction to convey the idea of potato. Now, we could use an abstraction that looks like a potato, like this. We could also use the barcode, QR code, or SKU number like stores do, or we can abstract it and use the word potato. Now, potato here is a real, tangible thing. But what do we do about something like love, hate, imagination, jet lag? As I'm saying these words, they likely conjure ideas in your head because they are engaging in what you already know about them. And this engagement is the basis of communication because we have all collectively decided what these specific words mean. And even if we haven't experienced them for ourselves, we still know a lot about them because of societal references to them, because of dictionaries, and we have an idea of what they look like even if we've never felt them before. Because words are abstractions of things, whether tangible or not. There is more to the word than just the thing. There is the history of the thing, how the word is situated in the text surrounding it, and the underlying communications of the text altogether. This is potato. That is text, not a potato. But from context, you know the thing that this is the potato that I'm talking about, without me having to show you the potato. But this is not a potato. This is just text. This is the concept behind Magritte's Ce n'est pas une pipe painting. It's paint on a canvas that conveys an image of a pipe, but it itself is not a pipe, and it even says so. It's just paint on a canvas. But the conveyance is the purpose of words, though the words themselves are not the things they represent. This is how words can fail. They can be weird, they can be grand, and they can mean more than the sums of their parts. If I were to say to you, I am a potato, there's a moment where your brain can't really make sense of that because I'm not literally a potato, but your brain engages your imagination and takes what you know about potato. It's lumpy, it's awkward, it's delicious when cooked right, it likes the dark, it's a root vegetable, it's hard until it's cooked, etc. And it starts making associations about me and potato. Then you may remember that others before have called themselves potatoes, and it's a societal thing that has happened and spread because of internet. Now, there are potato memes, there are pictures, there are blog posts, Reddit threads, subreddits, videos, all about being potato. None of us are really potatoes, but the idea persists. Also, from this is a potato to I am a potato, the text changed. So the context changed and the subtext changed. This is how words working together are capable of meaning more than the sums of their parts. Words carry baggage. They have etymologies, histories of usage, associations, denotations, connotations, and all sorts of funny things that they carry with them because they are just representations of things, actions, and descriptions. But because words are not themselves the things, there are discrepancies there that poets like to explore and play with. That brings us back to the dictionary. Again, the dictionary houses words, in this case, English words, their etymologies, their tenses, iterations, and their common usages. The dictionary documents changes over time and keeps track of old words that have fallen out of favor and new words in our ever-expanding languages. The dictionary is a treasure trove of words, the most discrete unit of language, which is the building block of every poem. This is why it is such a powerful tool. Now, we've talked about the philosophy of words and how they are used to communicate, but in our What is a poem video? We know that poems aren't here to communicate ideas, thoughts, or events. In fact, a poem is an object of language that is patterned and ordered for the purposes of expression, experimentation, communion, and or play to produce an effect to be experienced rather than information to be processed. What poets do is they capitalize where words fail, where they're funny, where they mean multiple things. They create associations, they form descriptions, and they position words in ways to share experiences and form relationships. They experiment with them, play around, and break the usual words surrounding rules when writing, all to approach saying the unsayable and evoke poetry with a capital P. Words are our arsenal. They are the building blocks of poems. And to evoke poetry, you really need to start with appreciating and understanding words. So, in the last video, I asked you to write for 10 minutes with the prompt, I remember. What I want you to do is to go through and highlight all the cool words that you use, the words that seem interesting, the words that took you by surprise. And I want you to write them down on a separate piece of paper and keep track of words like these as you write. I mentioned in the last video also that we tend to hoard bits of our chosen medium. This is where I want you to start your hoard. This is the beginning of your poetic diction. Next time, we're going to talk about building images and how there are more than just 5 senses. But for now, I want to leave you with a poem by Elaine Equi, which is from her book, The Cloud of Knowable Things, printed by Coffee Shop Press in 2003. And I want you to think about how she uses words and how the meanings change depending on the context and how it affects the subtext of what she's saying. A quiet poem. My father screamed whenever the phone rang. My aunt often screamed when she opened the door. Out back, the willows caterwauled. In the kitchen, the faucet screamed, a drop at a time. At school, they called screaming recess, or sometimes music. Our neighbor's daughter had a scream, more melodious than my own. At first, Colonel Parker had to pay girls to get them to scream for Elvis. I didn't want to scream when I saw the Beatles, but I did. After that, I screamed for even mediocre bands. Late in his career, John Lennon got into primal scream. Many people find it relaxing to scream. Just as crawling precedes walking, so screaming precedes speech. The roller coaster is just one of many scream-inducing devices. The ambulance tries in its clumsy way to emulate the human scream, which in turn tries to emulate nature. Wind is often said to shriek, but Sylvia Plath also speaks of the parched scream of the sun. Jim Morrison wanted to hear the scream of the butterfly. With ultra-sensitive equipment, scientists measure the screams of plants they've tortured. It's proven that if you scream at a person for years, they suddenly stop. He will hear even the tenderest words of love as violent curses. And to anyone who speaks above a whisper, he will say, "Don't you dare. Don't you dare raise your voice to me." A special thank you to Elaine Equi for letting me read her poem, and a thank you to all of you. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that I can bring you more poetry. And if you want to support poetic content in a more direct way, hop on over to my Patreon, where you can become an official friend face for just $1 a month, which goes to buying props and keeping the fairy lights on. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Peace out, friend faces, and remember, be kind to one another. Love and Poe.